Today with a quick story. Earlier this year, I met a young woman named Julissa. Julissa is a high school senior from Pennsylvania. For years, she did not have high-speed internet at home. Her family, however, found ways to make do without. Then the pandemic hit, and Julissa began attending school virtually. She told me she did the best she could. She completed homework assignments on her phone and relied on a spotty mobile hotspot to virtually attend class. But without reliable access to high-speed internet, Julissa began to fall behind. Her story is the story of so many people. Today, more than 30 million people in our country do not have access to high-speed internet, either because they live in communities where high-speed internet is not easily available, or more often, because they cannot afford the cost of a plan. These folks there are seniors who have to take their telemedicine visits in the local library without the privacy that they want and are due. These are parents who cannot afford to work remotely, and small business owners who cannot sell their products online. These are students like Julissa, who are being held back from achieving their incredible and God-given potential. In the 21st century, access to the internet is essential for success. Every person in our nation, no matter how much they earn, should be able to afford high-speed internet and a high-speed internet plan. So that is why we are all here together today. Last year, knowing this was an issue, our administration invested $65 billion to expand access to affordable high-speed internet through the bipartisan infrastructure law. As part of this investment, we funded the Affordable Connectivity Program, also known here in DC as ACP. Through this program, if a member of your household receives SNAP benefits, Medicaid, free or reduced price school lunch, or a number of other programs, or if your household makes below a certain income, then you are eligible to receive a discount on your monthly internet bill of $30 a month, or $75 a month if you live on tribal lands. Altogether, nearly 40% of American households are eligible for this important program. And so far, we have helped more than 11.5 million households lower their monthly bills and have access to affordable high-speed internet. Households like Julissa's. In May of 2020, her family signed up for high-speed internet through the ACP, and because of this initiative, Julissa could attend class and do her homework without worrying about her internet connection. And she told me the ACP single-handedly saved her junior year, and this fall, she will be the first in her family to attend college at her top choice school. Indeed. So the point, of course, is that when we connect people with high-speed internet, we connect them with opportunity. The opportunity to get an education, to train for a new career, to build a business, to keep in touch with loved ones who are far away. In short, the opportunity to live healthier, happier, and more prosperous lives. This is what so much of our work as an administration comes down to, fighting to make sure every person, no matter who they are or where they start, has the opportunity to succeed and thrive. Today, we take another step forward in that fight. Earlier this year, our administration called on internet service providers to take action to help folks get interneted and connected in part by offering more affordable high-speed internet plans to their customers. As the President will speak in a moment, the providers joining us today have answered that call. And so, before you hear from them, it is my great pleasure to introduce a woman who has felt the impact of this program firsthand, a mother who knows the difference that access to high-speed internet can make for the young people of our nation. Please welcome Alicia Jones.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm grateful for this opportunity today. Over the course of the last 2 years, we have all navigated unfamiliar territories and unsettling times. We faced much grief and heartache during this COVID-19 pandemic. We were all affected differently. However, for my family, one thing that remained consistent and reliable was our internet service. Through the emergency broadband benefit and now the Affordable Connectivity Program, the burden of paying for this essential service was lifted. I knew that with all of the other struggles that we faced, providing internet for my family was not one of them. I have 2 children. 2 boys, 18 and 12 years of age. And through our high-speed broadband provider, Comcast, we were able to stay connected with family, receive telehealth care, and go to classes and access other necessary resources. And now that this critical service has been upgraded to even faster speed, with the Internet Essentials Plus program, we all now strive to do our best with our next ventures. This is what we consider our game changer. I am currently enrolled in a medical billing and coding program certification through my community college. And now that I can attend my classes virtually, knowing that my connection is fast enough to keep me present and actively participating. My oldest son will be entering Delaware State University this fall. Through this internet service, he has already achieved his certification as a Christian mental health mentor because he could have access to these classes in the evenings. This is why we are here today, to discuss the continuation and improvement of quality, high-speed internet provided through the Affordable Connectivity Program. I would encourage each of you that hears this message today to sign up for the Affordable Connectivity Program and change the future of your family just like I did for mine. To discuss more about the Affordable Connectivity Program, it is now my great honor to present to you our very own President of the United States of America, President Joe Biden. Thank you. Thank you so very much.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the sunny Rose Garden. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That old saying, all that needs to be said has already been said. But I'm going to say it again. Look, Alicia, thank you very much for your story, and I want to thank the Vice President Harris, for leading. leading this effort in this administration on this issue. And I'm proud to announce today that our administration has brought together Democrats, Republicans, the private sector to lower the high-speed internet cost for tens of millions of Americans. You know, but before we get into the details, I want to talk about why this matters. You already know that, actually, from hearing my two colleagues speak before me. But here, in the United States of America, how many times have you seen a mom or dad drive up to a parking lot outside of McDonald's and just so they could get connected to the internet so their kid could do their homework during the pandemic, literally? It's just not right. It's not who we are. We saw during the pandemic how essential high-speed internet really is, and allowing seniors to connect with their doctors through telemedicine, as the Vice President referenced, when it wasn't safe to go in person, allowing students to keep learning back when schools were closed, allowing millions of workers to do their job remotely, allowing small businesses to stay afloat on the strength of their online sales, allowing farmers to use precision agricultural technology to improve their yields, and allowing countless families to stay connected to the people they love even when they weren't able to get together. You know, the need for high-speed internet is a little bit like it used to be, probably what my grandfather talked about, the need to have a telephone. It's pretty consequential, and only going to keep growing, this need. High-speed internet is not a luxury any longer. It's a necessity. And that's why the bipartisan infrastructure law included $65 billion to make sure we expand access to broadband internet in every region of the country, urban, suburban, and rural. Everywhere. Everywhere. So every household in America can get connected. By expanding access to it's only part of the challenge, though, as was referenced by the Vice President. It was about affordability as well. And today, too many families simply can't afford to get connected, even if there's access to get connected. So they go without high-speed internet, or they sacrifice other necessities in order to make it work. That's why in November, when we passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we also created something called the Affordable Connectivity Program. I refuse to call it the ACP. I am so tired of acronyms in Washington. I can't stand it. I cannot stand it. But I'm going to have to learn, aren't I? Here's how it works. If your household income is twice the federal poverty level or less, that's about $55,000 per year for a family of four, or $27,000 for an individual. Or a member of your household is on Medicaid or supplemental security income, or a number of other programs, you're eligible for the Affordable Connectivity Program. Nearly 40% of the households in America qualify. And if you qualify, you're going to get a $30 credit per month toward your internet bill, which most folks will mean they get on for nothing. Look, zero. Let me explain. In the past, $30 a month meant you had to settle for a slow internet service unless you wanted to pay a heck of a lot more out of pocket. But over the last few months, my administration has worked closely with internet providers. This is a case where big business stepped up, urging them to cut their prices and raise their speeds. I'm trying to get others to do the same thing with inflation, but these guys are the best. Well, look, we secured commitments from 20 providers, most of whom are in the garden today, going to lower prices for high-speed internet for tens of millions of households. So now families who are eligible can select a plan from a participating provider and receive high-speed internet at no cost in most cases. These include providers like AT&T. Is AT&T here? Thank you, man. AT&T, Comcast, where are you? Stand up, man, let them see you. Frontier, Spectrum, Verizon. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're really changing people's lives. You really are. Along with small providers serving rural areas like Jackson Energy Authority in Tennessee and Idea Tech in Kansas. You guys here? Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All told, providers taking part, you know, everybody, it's going to cover about 80% of the United States population, including about half the rural population. Each of them is committed to offering families who use this program at least one high-speed plan that's fully covered. For example, Verizon lowered the price of its high-speed service from $40 a month to $30 a month. Spectrum doubled the speed of its $30 a month plan for eligible households. And we made sure that there would be no hidden fees, no tricks. This is straight stuff. This means fast internet, good download speeds with no data caps, and no extra fees for millions of American families. And it's going to change people's lives. You know, from rural Appalachia to Brooklyn to the Black Belt, families who have struggled to get internet that they need, even to find if they could connect to it, let alone if they could afford it. For schoolwork, telemedicine, starting a business, and so much more. And we finally get connected reliably and affordably. And I want to thank the companies who are working with us to deliver this for all families. It's a big deal. And this is a great example of what we can achieve as the federal government and the private sector work together to solve serious problems. And this is not only is it this great news for family budgets, it also means more jobs, more new small businesses, more connectivity. So many people in so many communities that have been left behind. Already more than 11.5 million have signed up and are on the program. Thousands more are signing up each day. And you can get started by taking advantage of this in this new phase today. But we urge there's about 30 million additional people are eligible for this plan that basically get free internet and good internet. We want each of you, each and every one of you, to take advantage of the chance and cut your internet cost. To find out if you're eligible, you can dial 877-384-2575. Now, if you got that, you're way ahead of me. 877-384-2575. And for English or Spanish, or if you're able to get onto the internet, just visit just go to getinternet.gov, and you'll be able to connect as well. You know, we're also working with local, state, and federal agencies, as well as local and national organizations, to help get more eligible families enrolled so they can get connected. You got to know how to know, as a friend of mine used to say. You know, this program is a big deal. It's the only one piece of work that we're doing to try to bring down the cost of high-speed internet to every single American. We're also promoting the competition. More than 65 million Americans live in a place with only one high-speed internet provider. Research shows that when you live somewhere with limited internet options, you pay 5 times more on average than families that have more choices. That's what the lack of competition does. It raises the prices you pay. So we're working to fix that problem as well. For example, my administration is taking steps to put a stop to the exclusive deals that landlords make with internet companies. Because those sweetheart arrangements, millions of Americans who live in apartment buildings only have one internet option. And they can stop, if they can stop those exclusive deals, then families will have options to choose a provider that they want. And that means companies will have to compete for their business, which in turn means lower prices. In addition, more than 30 million Americans live in places where the speeds are too slow or where there's no broadband and there's no infrastructure at all. That's especially true in rural communities. And as I said at the start, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're delivering high-speed internet infrastructure to every part of the country. And I mean that literally, every part of the country. The bottom line is this. My top priority is fighting inflation and lowering prices for families and things they need. Today's announcement is going to give millions of families a little more breathing room to help them pay their bills. You know, we work with Democrats and Republicans and business and nonprofits to make this happen. and we're going to keep working to fight inflation and lower cost to all American families for a lot of other things as well. But again, I want to thank the businesses that are here today. I want to thank the internet companies, the providers. It really matters. You're going to change people's lives. And by the way, you know, one of the things that is, it's a totally different subject. I'm just going to touch it for a second. There's an awful lot of growing data that what's happened because of COVID and other things, the mental health problems are become a serious problem. Feeling left out, feeling you can't participate, not knowing what to do. I know, and Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, is going to talk about this in other contexts, but, you know, I really think that just knowing that you belong, knowing and feeling that you can get access to what other people get on a regular basis will make a big difference for people. So God bless you all, and may God protect you, and all the members of Congress who made this happy. I was going to name each one of you, and I was told don't, because people who aren't here wanted to be here. But I think I should name you anyway, shouldn't I? I mean, no? Well, I don't know, man. Anyway, they're all in the front row here, so, and they're all doing a hell of a job. I started off, when I had the list, I said, give me the, and I started off, I said, Sherry Boutros. I said, wait, there's a lot of people who aren't here, don't do it. Anyway, but the people who are here are, you know, John Hickenlooper, Sherry Boutros, Dan Kildee, Debbie Dingell, Tom O'Halloran, Alyssa Slotkin, and Representative Sansbury. So, but there's a lot more too. But anyway. Thank you. It's going to make a big difference. Thank you, everybody, and stick around and sunbathe. All right, thank you.
A few minutes ago, you heard the president talk about Victory in Europe Day, which the world commemorated this weekend as a celebration of the end of World War II and a victory for the United States and the Allied forces over the scourge of fascism and aggression in the defense of freedom and democracy. While President Putin and the Russian people celebrated Victory Day today, we are seeing Russian forces commit war crimes and atrocities in Ukraine as they engage in a brutal war that is causing so much suffering and needless destruction. This day is supposed to be about celebrating peace and unity in Europe, and the defeat of Nazis in World War II. That is what is celebrated every year in Russia as well. And instead, Putin is perverting history, changing history to try to, or attempting to change it, I should say, to justify his unprovoked and unjustified war, which has brought catastrophic loss of life and immense human suffering. We're continuing to do what we can to provide support for Ukraine at this pivotal moment, flowing security, economic, and humanitarian assistance. Today, the President signed the Lend-Lease Act into law, which adds to our suite of tools as we provide Ukraine with the weapons and equipment they need. Yesterday, as you all know, the First Lady visited Ukraine in a historic visit to meet with the First Lady of Ukraine. She did that purposefully on Mother's Day to be there and recognize the sacrifices of so many mothers during this time in Ukraine, and send an important message of solidarity. And our chargé on the ground led a group of diplomats temporarily returning to Kyiv to demonstrate our unity with the people of Ukraine on Victory in Europe Day as they fight to defend their freedom and their democracy. President Biden also spoke with our G7 partners yesterday and President Zelensky about our collective response to President Putin's brutal war, and we announced a new round of actions to ratchet up the pain on Putin. This includes banning U.S. services that help Russian elites and companies build wealth and evade sanctions, additional restrictions on a broad range of inputs and products like bulldozers and industrial engines that Putin needs for his military, and sanctions on big executives at Russia's largest banks and Russian military officials. The United States also sanctioned the top 3 most watched TV stations in Russia that bolster Putin's war by spreading his propaganda. And for the first time ever, the G7 agreed as a whole to ban or phase out Russian oil. We will keep building on our unprecedented sanctions that are enacting a heavy toll on Russia's economy, with GDP expected to collapse by double digits. Our export controls with more than 30 other countries have throttled Russia's access to critical technology it needs to maintain its military. With that, why don't you kick it off?
Thank you. We have the Prime Minister of Italy who's coming on Tuesday, and there's some pressures on the European bond market. I'm wondering, does the Biden administration believe that the European economy is facing recession solely because of the effects of Putin's war, or are there other factors at work?
Well, we've seen the impact of President Putin's invasion of Ukraine here in the United States. We've seen in our own economy how inflation and inflationary data over the last several weeks or even months has been impacted a great deal by energy prices, and a great deal of that is because of President Putin's invasion. I don't have an assessment from here on the European economy other than to say we know, if we look at the past several months, even before the invasion, that the GDP here and our economic growth here was higher than the rest of the world, including Europe, because of the strength of the steps the president took earlier last year. So, they will have a range of topics to discuss, including ongoing efforts to hold President Putin and the Russian leadership to account, to continue to put in place crippling sanctions, to continue to support Ukrainians as they bravely fight this war against the Russians. And they will, of course, also discuss our close cooperation on promoting economic prosperity, increasing Europe's energy security, and combating climate change, all topics that we expect to be part of the preparations and on the agenda for the G7.
Maybe one more on another topic. You suggested that peacefully protesting outside the homes of judges and Supreme Court justices is part of freedom of expression and part of what we do in the United States. But there's a law in Virginia that actually prohibits protest outside private residence, even when it's done peacefully. So I'm wondering if any sort of demonstrations outside of private homes might run afoul of that law and other laws like it in other parts of the country.
We're certainly not suggesting anyone break any laws. I would note that the president's view has long been, and I tweeted this earlier this morning and repeated and made a number of these comments last week as well, that violence, threats, and intimidation have no place in political discourse. Yes, we are a country that promotes democracy, and we certainly allow for peaceful protest in a range of places in the country. None of it should violate the law. No one is suggesting that. And it should never resort to violence, to threats, to intimidation in any way, shape, or form. But that is what our position is and the president's position is. Go ahead.
Thank you. On abortion, Republican leader Mitch McConnell has said that a national ban on abortion could be possible, depending on the votes. Without court intervention, just how at risk does the administration believe the U.S. is to completely outlaw abortion?
I think we're at serious risk. You noted Mitch McConnell and other Republicans in Congress are talking about a national ban on a woman's right to choose. There were a number, I think it was something, I can get the exact number here, but dozens and dozens of Republicans in Congress signed on to the Mississippi court case and advocating for severe restrictions on a woman's right to choose and a woman's right to make choices about her own body. And we've seen in other places in the country. Just yesterday, the governor of Mississippi said directly whether that. Just yesterday, the governor said directly whether they wouldn't say whether they would directly go after the right to use contraception, meaning that's another area where, so as the president has said over the course of the last nearly week, his concern is about, yes, a woman's right to make choices about her own health care, about what this final opinion could be. It's also about what choices could be made that go beyond that. I'd also note that Louisiana legislators advanced a bill to classify abortion as homicide, which would allow women who terminate their pregnancies to be charged with murder and potentially criminalize in vitro fertilization and forms of birth control. So in some ways, yes, you're seeing an outcry by the nearly 2/3 of the public, many of them peacefully protesting, who are concerned about what this opinion will say. But you're also seeing a number of Republicans in states and some in Congress double down on this potential to overturn a law that has been the law of the land for 50 years.
You mentioned the Mississippi governor and his comments on the possibility of banning certain types of contraception. Is the administration planning to take steps to try and preemptively safeguard access to contraception?
Well, I would say there's a range of considerations that are underway, both by our counsel's office, by the Department of Justice, led by the Gender Policy Council, to take every step we can to protect women's fundamental rights and protect rights beyond that. I would note that, and the president talked about this a little bit last week, but when we're talking about Roe has been the precedent for a number of other laws passed by the Supreme Court that impacts people's fundamental lives, their basic rights, their freedoms, their privacy, and their protections, including, if you look back, Griswold versus Connecticut, Eisenstadt versus Baird, which ensured the right to use contraception was protected. That is law now, but we are clear-eyed about this being a precedent for that and what could come next. Obergefell versus Hodges, which protects the right to marry. Lawrence versus Texas, which stops government from preventing sexual relationships between consenting adults. For 50 years, Roe has been the basis for a number of these decisions that have impacted and changed people's lives, in our view, for the better.
You mentioned again, I mean, obviously you're discussing next steps here. You've said before that you're not going to detail what's sort of on the table, especially until the final ruling comes down. But why not? I mean, especially when states have trigger laws, sort of why not communicate at least what the options are to try and get ahead of some of this, give women some assurances, as we see, obviously growing concern across the country?
Sure, Mary. Well, what I've talked about a little bit in here in the past, which people can look to as a model for what we're trying to do, is what we've done in response to SB 8 in Texas, right? We created the Dire Need Grant Awards to provide funding to expand access to emergency contraception and family planning services. In addition, you also saw the Department of Justice and the Attorney General release a statement in response to Texas SB 8 that reaffirmed their commitment to using existing federal law to protect the safety of patients seeking access to reproductive health services. The Department of Health and Human Services has also been implementing a three-pronged department-wide response to protect patients and providers. We've also talked in here a great deal about the fact that we know that 26 states have indicated their plans on a different varying levels, I should say, of overturning women's fundamental rights. 13 have trigger laws, and what we're looking at, and some states have also taken steps. Connecticut, California are two of them. Others are also examples to protect women's rights. What we're looking at here is nearly half the country potentially not allowing women to have access to choices about their own bodies and their health care that has been the law of the land for 50 years. So, and we know who that will impact, because 75% of people seeking abortions make less than 200% of the poverty level. We know the majority of people seeking abortions are women of color. So we're taking into account all of that as we look at options. Go ahead.
Just to follow up on all that, Mary asked what I would for the most part, but
look at that collegiality at play.
When are we going to hear from the president on this issue? We've heard from just about every other Democrat. You've clearly come prepared with all the details today. we have to wait until the court ruling is official, or might he speak out beforehand?
I would say he spoke multiple times last week, and I expect you'll continue to hear him speak about this issue.
He spoke on the tarmac, it was noisy.
Does that
He
not
raised his
count?
concern. Well, I just wondered if there's going to be something slightly more prepared and thoughtful to try to, make use of the presidential bully pulpit the way he can. When he wants to, he can draw attention to issues.
You're right, and what I was pointing to, Ed, is that obviously this was in his mind and front and center for him last week because he spoke multiple times to this, unprompted in some cases, some prompted by questions, of course, and I expect he will continue to do that. What I don't expect he will do is speak to an opinion that is not yet final, that has not yet been released, but certainly speaking to the protection of women's fundamental rights, of their rights to make decisions about their own health care, and certainly his concern, which he's talked about for decades, about privacy and privacy protections, which he said last week was the basis of his leading the fight against the board nominations. So I expect you'll continue to hear him talk about that, and hopefully there will be more opportunities for you all to ask good questions.
Two other, if I could real quick. Tomorrow he's giving a speech on inflation.
Yeah.
Wondering if you can give us some sense of what more he'll get into.
Sure. Well, I would note that as we announced and previewed a little bit, the president will be speaking to his plan, his continued plan to continue the fight to address inflation in the coming months. There's a lot of work that has been done to date on this front, whether it was the steps he's taken to address energy crisis, the release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, additional steps he's taken on that front, or whether it was steps he's taken even in recent weeks to fix the family glitch, to help more people have access to health care, or steps he announced in the last couple of weeks to make E15 available to thousands of people at gas stations across the country. But what you will also hear him talk about tomorrow is the contrast, and the contrast that his plan and the plans he has been implementing for months now draws with those on the other side of the aisle who have not put forward any plan to lower costs for the American people. So it will be his opportunity to lay that all out together.
And there is growing concern about a persistent supply issue with infant baby formula.
Yeah.
There's about a 40% shortage right now. Major retailers having to limit how much people can buy, especially acute in places like Texas and Tennessee, Missouri, Iowa. This is partly an FDA issue, but it could be a Biden administration issue. Just wondering if you guys are planning on taking any steps to help remedy that.
Well, let me first say, as you know, but the FDA issued a recall to ensure that they are meeting their obligation to protect the health of Americans, including babies, who of course were receiving or taking this formula, and ensure safe products are available. That's their job. Ensuring the availability of these products is also a priority for the FDA, and they're working around the clock to address any possible shortage. Okay, that is like hearing your voice on the answering machine, which I know that's a very outdated reference, but we've all been there. So what the FDA is doing, which while they're independent, they are part of the administration, is taking a number of steps to address. That includes working with major infant formula manufacturers to ensure they're increasing production, because part of this issue is, of course, making sure there's stock on the shelves, right? And working with the industry right now to optimize their supply lines, product sizes to increase capacity, and prioritizing product lines that are of greatest needs. Because obviously, as someone who my child has long been out of formula, fortunately, but it's close enough that I remember when you're trying to go to the store and get the specific kind of formula for your age child or whatever their needs are. So they are taking steps with that in mind. They're also exercising flexibility and expediting review of notifications of manufacturing changes that will help increase supply, particularly in the case of specialized formula. So that applies to that as well for medical needs. And they're also trying to streamline import-entry review processes for already notified infant formula products coming from notified foreign facilities. So what they're trying to do, in the shorthand of it, is increase supply by working with a range of manufacturers and what their capacity is to ensure that the kinds of formula that was recalled is where they're able to help ensure it's on the shelves.
It isn't said that it's kept a national stockpile, you know?
I don't believe there's a national stockpile of baby formula, but the FDA is not just their responsibility in their view to ensure that we're meeting our obligations to protect Americans. It is also their obligation to take steps to ensure supply can be met when they take these steps. So that is what they're very focused on.
What's an answering machine, if you can?
Since you're 25, I'll explain it to you after the briefing.
Could you say, just give some general reaction to Putin's speech this morning?
Sure, I tried to do it a bit at the top, but what I will say is that what we saw President Putin do is give a version of revisionist history that took the form of disinformation that we have seen too commonly as the Russian playbook. Now, what is fortunate is that we are all aware, reporters around the world are aware, Europeans are aware, Americans are aware of the disinformation factory that President Putin and the Kremlin seem to be. But the suggestion that this war that was prompted by, directed by President Putin, was prompted by Western aggression or Western plans is patently false and absurd. And otherwise, I would say, our view is that we should remember, and this is why I did this at the top, what this day is actually about, which is something that we have all celebrated, which is the defeat of Nazis after World War II, something that Russians have celebrated in the streets for many years.
Quick question on a totally unrelated topic. Biden has blamed large meat packers for the run-up in meat prices.
Yeah.
And today, Tyson's Foods had another record or very good earnings out that showed its average prices for beef had climbed nearly 25% compared to the same quarter last year. I wondered if you all have any reaction to that. Is this the sort of price gouging that the administration is seeking to stop?
I don't have any reaction directly to one company's earnings, but what the president's concern is, and what Secretary Vilsack, who's been here a number of times, is concerned about, is that the meat industry, the conglomerates are so small, they're so, not small, they're very large, but they're so dominant that they are elbowing out, of course, smaller producers, and that they have this capacity and ability to jack up prices and pass those on to consumers when they should not. But I don't have any direct reaction to one company's reports. I am not aware of this issue and our concern being addressed, though. So it's an ongoing concern. Go ahead.
Just a little bit more on the Victory Day speech. Given that he didn't really point to specific victories and he also didn't signal, some kind of upcoming massive escalation or some pathway to ending the war, I'm just wondering if there were any takeaways for U.S. officials specifically related to the trajectory of the war from that speech?
I would say what we're watching closely is what we're seeing on the ground. And what we're seeing on the ground is the right now, a great deal of the war, as you all know, and my colleagues at the Department of Defense have briefed on this even as recently as this morning, has obviously moved more to the east, and that terrain is very different. The Donbass is a lot more flat. It's little small villages. It's very different from what we were seeing in Kyiv. That is a terrain that the Ukrainians know well. And what we look at as we look to the totality of the country, and if we go back to mid-February when President Putin was giving speeches basically declaring he was going to subsume Ukraine, take over the country, the territorial integrity of the country, and go beyond that, that is exactly not what's happening today. President Putin and the Russians are not marching through Kyiv. They are struggling to fight in other parts of the country, and the Ukrainians are bravely and courageously fighting every day. So we look at what's happening on the ground, though it is important to note and to call out the revisionist history that we saw in this speech, and the fact that any such statements that we've seen for months from President Putin, that the war was prompted by the West, is just patently false and inaccurate, and we can't state that too often.
On the First Lady's trip to Ukraine, is there anything more you can share? You've talked a little bit about why she wanted to choose Mother's Day to travel into Ukraine. In terms of sort of the security concerns, which you've talked about a lot, how were you all able to get to a point where you could feel confident, the president could feel confident that she would be totally safe?
I'm not going to get into behind-the-scenes security concerns or considerations. Obviously, she would not have gone if we did not feel comfortable with the security arrangements. I will note that she went there, as you said, because she wanted to go on Mother's Day, because she thought it was important to show the Ukrainian people that the war has to stop, that the war has been brutal, and that the people of the United States stand with the people of Ukraine. That's why she went yesterday, and to show that the hearts of the American people are with the mothers of Ukraine. She also, of course, she's been back now, and she's had an opportunity to speak with the president, and has conveyed, and she said this publicly, directly to him, what she saw on the ground, the need to support the people of Ukraine. She saw the horrors and the brutality that the people she met had experienced, and that was something she conveyed directly to him. But in terms of security, obviously we have a range of security considerations we make, and I'm not going to get into detail those from here, though.
I have a quick COVID question. Sure. The warning about the 100 million potential COVID infections by the fall and winter if new COVID funding isn't approved. Dr. Jha has said that this is based on a range of internal and external models. Could the White House point us to which specific models were used to get to that number?
There are a range of, as he said, internal and external models. Well within that range is that number. The point he was making is that we know what we need to do. We have put out an entire playbook to address the pandemic, to help a preparedness plan, to ensure Americans are protected and that we stay on the front foot in our fight against COVID. If we do not take action, we also know that we know that the virus is going to continue to evolve. And without us staying vigilant and prepared, like not having access to life-saving vaccines, testing, therapeutics, it has the ability to upend our lives. So he is a doctor himself, as you know, a very experienced one. He talks to a range of experts internally and externally. There's a range of models that are out there, and this is well within that range. And the point he was making is about the impact if we do not act, if Congress does not act.
Would the White House be able to make public?
Can we spread out the questions a little bit? Can you yield to your colleagues, please?
I would be happy to, but I think it would be polite if you let MJ finish her question.
Several.
Go ahead.
Could the White House make public the range of models so that we're able to see how we got to that 100 million infections?
I'm happy to see if there's more specific data we can make available, but what I can assure you of is that Dr. Jha is a very experienced public health expert. He talks to a range of officials internally and externally. That's what he's basing it on. Let me go to the back. Go ahead. Go ahead.
この度、日本に来ることに対して多くの方が感謝しています。That means many in Japan are welcoming the upcoming visit. And two quick questions. One, Japan has a population of 130 million, but only 39,000 deaths from the virus. I'm wondering if the administration is aware of that, and maybe some best practices can be studied while we're there. And second, will there be a reaffirmation of the security treaty, especially about the Senkaku Islands? And then I have one quick follow-up.
Sure. Well, what I can tell you is that we will certainly be doing a formal preview of the Asia trip, probably early next week, I would expect, before the president departs. While he is there, as you know, he's going to be holding bilateral meetings, including with his counterpart from Japan, and certainly discussing the ongoing COVID pandemic and the global fight to address the pandemic will be on the agenda, and we're grateful for Japan's contribution to that. They're also going to discuss a range of security issues, enhanced economic ties, climate change. There are a lot of topics that are on the agenda for this meeting, and of course, in light of North Korea's continued destabilizing actions in the region, including the test launch recently of multiple intercontinental ballistic missiles, the President will also make clear that our commitment to the security of Republic of Korea and our Japanese allies as well, range of topics, and we will have more, I promise. Go ahead.
Just follow up. I brought this up before, but many of us who were embedded during the wars, we have a lot of personal relationships with people in Afghanistan as well as Iraq. We have one family, the Asher family, that have still haven't been able to get out. Just any update on, it's been almost 8 months, and these are really people that
for the
their lives
specific
lost.
family, I'm more than happy to take their information and check in with the State Department after the briefing. Go ahead.
Jen, thank you. Lots of summits and meetings in the next couple of weeks,
Yes.
even ahead of the travel. Do you have any preview on what the President's participation will be in the COVID summit?
Sure. He will be addressing the COVID summit. We are, of course, convening the COVID summit in order to have an opportunity for the global community to continue to discuss our fight against the pandemic. I would note, just to get everybody up to speed as you're preparing for your coverage, we committed to sharing 1.2 billion doses of safe, effective vaccines with the world. We're making good on that commitment. We've shipped over 530 million doses of vaccine to 115 countries around the world, over 4 times more than our next closest donor. But what we expect to be a topic, or what part of our agenda is for this meeting, is to talk about the fact that those doses are getting harder to place because countries' freezers are simply full, and we have tens of millions of unclaimed doses because countries lack the resources to build out their cold chain, which basically is their refrigeration systems, to fight disinformation and to hire vaccinators. And there are actually some good examples of where we've had funding, where we have worked with countries. So for example, in Zambia, the U.S. government programs engaging local leaders in vaccine programs helped double vaccination rates from 12 to 22%. We know meaningful gains are possible, but part of this is also going to be an opportunity to elevate the fact that we need additional funding to continue to be a part of this effort around the world.
Is it going to be a problem if over on Capitol Hill they move ahead with the Ukraine aid package and sort of leave that COVID funding to the side right as this summit is convening?
Well, that's an active conversation literally as we speak right now on Capitol Hill. So what I will tell you is that the President is absolutely committed to signing into law both the Ukraine funding and also COVID funding, and he will continue to fight for both. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jim. Last week you mentioned that the administration is talking to a wide range of people about how to respond to this upcoming decision on abortion.
Yeah.
You mentioned business leaders. I'm just curious if you could elaborate on that. What kinds of businesses, and how do you see their role in this, in this response?
I think the point I was making, I don't have business leaders to read out for you, and we're going to keep a lot of these conversations private, but I would note that 2/3 of the public, even in Fox News polls, have said that they don't want to overturn Roe v. Wade. This is a mainstream position for the majority of the public. I'm not saying everyone agrees on it. That's not at all what I'm saying, but it is about 2/3 of the public. So there are a lot of stakeholders, a lot of private sector citizens and leaders who are concerned about what they could see if this opinion if this is a final version or close to a final version of the opinion. And part of our role here is to engage with leaders, whether they're on Capitol Hill or they are women's leaders or they're in advocacy groups, and certainly private sector leaders as well. Go ahead.
Thank you. the president and you have talked about the MAGA crowd or the ultra MAGA. How does that jive with his desire to be the bipartisan guy?
Well, the president's view is you can do both. He believes that there is work we can continue to do together. We're actively advocating for. He was out traveling in just last Friday on the Bipartisan Innovation Act. We believe that needs to move forward. It should move forward, and that can build on the nearly 80 bills that we signed into law last year that are bipartisan. But he's also not going to stand by and not call out what he sees as ultra MAGA behavior, ultra MAGA policies that are out of the mainstream of the country and are not in the interest of the American people. Whether that is efforts to prevent a woman from making choices about her own health care, or whether that is Chairman Scott's policy and proposals on that would raise taxes on people making less than $100,000 a year. He's going to continue to call that out, but he believes there is still a path to move forward on where we have agreement.
And on the First Lady's trip to Ukraine, does that change the calculations at all about the president making a visit to Ukraine, since this presumably worked?
Their travel is a little bit different. I think you all know from traveling with the president, but there's not a trip currently planned. But again, he would love to go to Ukraine. I just don't have anything planned or anything to preview at this point. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. There are reports now, you just alluded to this a minute ago, that Democrats are in fact going to bring forth that Ukraine aid without the COVID funding attached. I know you've told me last week that was something that the White House wanted to see them attached, but we're being told that the president actually had said, look, the Republicans don't support that, let's leave it aside. Can you confirm that? Was there a change in thinking over the last few days at the White House over how this package should proceed?
Well, that has been his preference, to get both of them done together, which he has thought that would be the most efficient process. Since this is actively happening right now, I don't have any confirmation of it from here. I expect we'll have more. Even though I have dwindling days left here, I'm still not going to get ahead of the president because, I want to enjoy those last few days. But hopefully we'll have more to say on where we stand soon. Go ahead.
Does the president plan to condemn the leak of the Supreme Court draft opinion or the doxing of the justices now that we've seen violence unfold?
Well, I would say that we have been clear, and the president's position has long been, that we should not see protest that takes the form of violence, that takes the form of vandalism, and that threatens anyone. That has long been his position for his entire career and continues to be his position.
And for tomorrow, your office released that...
But can I say one more thing? Sorry. We have not seen violence or vandalism against Supreme Court justices. We have seen it at Catholic churches. That's unacceptable. The president does not support that. We have seen it at some conservative organizations. That we don't support that. And we certainly call for, we know the passion, we understand the passion, we understand the concern. But what the president's position is that that should be peaceful, the protest. But continue, go ahead.
And as for tomorrow, the president plans to offer, as you said, a contrast, and it was written, quote, to congressional Republicans' ultra-MAGA plan to raise taxes. Now, the Washington Post has called that claim false, that there is a Republican congressional plan to raise taxes. Why is this statement still being shared?
Because Chairman Scott's plan, and we welcome him, we know he's asked for people to go to his website. We would encourage people to do the same thing and check out his plan that raises taxes for people making less than $100,000 a year.
Mitch McConnell and this report, there aren't any other Republicans signing on to this at this point. So is it fair to say that Republicans as a whole are pushing?
He's the chairman of the committee. If Republicans want to repudiate his plan, they should go do that. But otherwise, that continues to be what they're running on. So that's their position, not ours. Go ahead.
Jen, is the White House satisfied with the legislative strategy on abortion rights, which appears to be to have this vote on Wednesday, which will fail, and then make this a midterm issue?
Well, we support Leader Schumer's decision to get people on the record on this, on codifying Roe, and that's something the president would be happy to sign into law. At the same time, we certainly recognize that the votes, we don't have the votes. You can tell me, you cover the Hill closely, you can tell me if I'm wrong. We understand that, but we think it's important and an important issue to get people on the record on. Without getting into politics from here, again, I don't make the rules, I just try to follow them. In the president's statement last week, he noted that in order to take legislative action, we would need more Democratic senators, and we would need more pro-choice House members after the election in November. So we certainly recognize that, and we know that's on the minds of many people across the country.
And then if I can follow up on that, one of the votes you don't have is probably Joe Manchin's. I'm curious, when was the last time the president spoke to him about either this issue or his domestic agenda, which Manchin has been signaling he's open to maybe reviving some of these conversations that basically died in December?
Well, we are open to this moving forward as well. I will say that just because we don't confirm conversations happening, it doesn't mean they're not happening. But the president has asked us not to get in specific details or confirm the timing or specifics of their conversations, so I'm not going to do that.
Is it fair to say they're still actively happening?
I can tell you that we are still in touch with Senator Manchin. We certainly are in touch with a range of Democrats about the need and the importance of moving forward. And as it relates to the president's remarks tomorrow, obviously moving forward with a reconciliation package that would lower costs on American people, on elder care, on health care, on child care, would be a step that would help address how inflation is impacting people across this country. So we're having a range of conversations. A lot of Democrats are having a range of conversations with each other. I'm just not going to detail them more from here. Go ahead.
Jim, on the sanctions against Russia, what would it take to lift those? If Ukraine agreed to a peace deal, is that enough, or would the U.S. want something more?
I'm not going to negotiate from here on that. We do know that an end to this will require a negotiated diplomatic process, and we support that. But our role is to continue to strengthen the Ukrainians' hands, whether it's through military assistance, economic, humanitarian, continuing to keep the world united, and we're just not going to get ahead of the process.
And just real quickly, back on the Rick Scott question, Senator McConnell did repudiate that plan. So how can you say it stands for what Republicans?
Well, he's the chairman of the committee. I wouldn't say every Republican has repudiated. If that's not at all the plan they're running on, and none of them are for it, then they can speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Jen, on abortion, this country is about to engage. Some states that don't have trigger laws are going to decide what they think the restriction should be on abortion, and that's going to be a tough question in many of these states. Does the president have a clear belief in what he thinks the restrictions should be on, or if there should be any restrictions on abortion? And you've been asked this before, but I just want to get a clear answer.
The president's view is that women should be able to make choices about their own health care. I'm not going to detail it further beyond what he said in the past from here.
Restrictions?
Again, I'm not going to detail his opinion. He's spoken to this a number of times. Go ahead.
And I have one question on ASEAN and one question on Russia.
Sure.
On ASEAN, the rotating chair of ASEAN, Cambodia, said prior to the upcoming summit that it's a normal practice that the host of the nation to meet with the chair of ASEAN. And we know President Biden actually wrote a letter to Prime Minister Hun Sen, and will the president have a bilateral meeting with the Prime Minister?
I'm very happy to check on that. The schedule, I know it feels very close because it is. It's in a couple of days, but I will check and see. He obviously invited the leaders of ASEAN, from Brunei to Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam, as well as the ASEAN Secretary General to Washington to participate in the summit. But in terms of bilateral meetings, I can check and see if there's any on the schedule.
Another question on Russia about the intel leaks by the American officials. Thomas Friedman said that he was told that President Biden called the Director of National Intelligence, Director of CIA, and Secretary of Defense to make clear in the strongest and most colorful language that this kind of loose talk is reckless and has got to stop immediately before we end up in an unintended war with Russia. Is that true? And is the president worried about the unintended war with Russia?
Well, what I will tell you, without confirming private internal calls, that the president was displeased with the leaks. His view was that it was an overstatement of our role, an inaccurate statement, and also an understatement of the Ukrainians' role and their leadership, and he did not felt they were constructive. Go ahead. Did not feel. That was grammatically inaccurate. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks, Joe. There seems to be a lot of bipartisan support for listing Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. Is that something on the Hill I'm talking about? Is that something being discussed in the White House? And if the president's not there, how would he define the line that would have to be crossed to go there?
I know we've talked about this quite a bit in the past. I would note that to be named a state sponsor of terror, there's only about 4 countries that have been named state sponsors of terror in the world. There are a number of actions that are often taken if a country is named a state sponsor of terror. A number of those we've already taken, including crippling economic sanctions, sanctions on individuals, other restrictions for the country, and obviously making the country a global pariah is part of that objective. Those are all steps that we have already taken and implemented as it relates to Russia. I don't have anything to preview in terms of a consideration here, and certainly we'll see what happens in Congress. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. What's the White House reaction to Sinn Féin's gains in the Northern Ireland Assembly over the weekend?
Let me check with our national security team, and we'll see if we can get you a comment on that specifically. Go ahead, John.
Hey, Jen, you were unequivocal in condemning violence, but as you know, there's also some allies who are protesting outside justices' homes, including Brett Kavanaugh, who, if there's any kind of a compromise, conservative ruling that preserves some of Roe, he could be part of that with Roberts. So my question is it appropriate to protest outside people's homes, and is it productive or not productive?
Look, I would say in terms of the productive question, that's not for me to speak to. Obviously, these justices make decisions as an independent body. How they are influenced or if they are influenced is not for me to make a determination of. We do believe in peaceful protests. We do not believe in or support any intimidation of any kind. Obviously, the violation or breaking of any law, as somebody raised before, or threats or intimidation of any individual. What we do support is people peacefully protesting, and they do that in a range of places.
But you wouldn't wave anybody off for tactical reasons.
We're not here to give tactical advice to protesters. What we are here to call for is peaceful protest, for people not to resort to violence, to vandalism, or certainly intimidation of any kind. Go ahead.
Yeah, as we look ahead to tomorrow's inflation speech, let me ask you to look back at some of the warnings that were issued last year by Summers and Ratner and so on. In retrospect, were they right that some of the government policies were going to lead to inflation?
I wouldn't say we agreed with them then, and we don't agree with them now. I would note that as it relates to actions like the American Rescue Plan, the alternative to not putting in place and advocating for the American Rescue Plan would have been the economy continuing to spiral, right? We were providing assistance and relief in the form of checks to people who needed that assistance at the time. That package also helped fund and prepare for a fight against COVID. It helped keep schools open. 100% of schools are open today, in large part because of the American Rescue Plan. It helps states and localities support and keep police, keep local authorities, keep local governments open at a time where that was in question. So we know, if we look at the recent inflation data, depending on which data you look at, 2/3 to even 70% of inflation data is a result of energy prices. A large part of that is the result, and Chairman Powell has spoken to this, and Secretary Yellen has also spoken to this, as a result of President Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the impact on the global energy markets. Those are all steps and impacts that I don't think anyone could have predicted a year ago. Go ahead.
So, thanks, Jen. So on that, the economy is signaling some weakness going forward. What's the level of concern? Well, first of all, is the president watching the markets and the data coming in, and what's his level of concern there's a recession in the next 12 months?
Well, without, as you know, we don't really speak to or comment on the judgments, ups and downs of the stock market, or the daily movement of the stock market, I should say. Well, it's volatile. We've seen that, and we certainly monitor it from here. I would note that since President Biden took office, the market is up considerably. When we look at economic data internally, and when a lot of external economists look at economic data, they look at the fact that we've created over 8 million jobs since the president took office, that the unemployment rate has dropped to 3.6%, that GDP grew up 5.7% last year, the fastest rate since 1984, and also that household balance sheets are strong and businesses are investing in the United States. So we look at that base data, that data, as we look at the economy, and of course we continue to monitor as data comes in and as we see fluctuations.
What's his level of concern about a recession?
Again, we monitor it. We are continuing to. We're not predicting that at this point in time.
One more thing on new sanctions that was just announced on Russia. Yeah. But China last week cut tariffs on coal from Russia coming in to 0. The Chinese have also had a record imports last month from Russia to China. 57% was the increase. At what point is China breaking the sanctions? And then when is the president going to stand up and say, and call out China to stop this behavior in supporting Russia?
We clearly will watch closely, and if that were to happen, I don't think we have seen to date a breaking of the sanctions at this point in time. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks. So I'd like to ask you first about the coronavirus and then about a transparency matter.
Sure.
On the coronavirus, the CDC data indicate that we are getting pretty close to the 1 million death mark.
Yeah.
Some outlets say we've already crossed 1 million deaths. I was hoping, as we're talking about potentially rolling back tariffs on Chinese goods, can you say, where the tariffs question comes into pushing China to be transparent on the origins? And can you detail anything that President Biden has done with his levers of power, be it sanctions or tariffs or anything else, to press for transparency from China?
Okay, there was a lot packed in there, so let me do my best here. I would say first, as you noted at the top of your question, we track the CDC data as well as Johns Hopkins data, and you are right, we are getting close to 1 million, and we will be marking that from here, and as we get closer, we'll have more to mark from here. The president has had recent engagements with President Xi, as we have had, at a very high level from a range of national security officials, and we always raise transparency in those conversations, but I don't have more to read out from those at this point in time. And what was the third part?
Or tariffs, or,
there's an ongoing review. I would look at it separately from the COVID deaths or from Russia. There's an ongoing review on Chinese tariffs. We've been looking at those through the prism of how they're impacting industries here in the United States. We feel that a number of them have not been constructive and have hurt, had a negative impact on a number of industries. So we're looking at and we're continuing our review of that, which is being led by our ambassador, Catherine Tai.
Would tariffs be used to pressure China to be transparent, though? Is that part of the consideration at all when considering rolling them back?
Well, again, we consider a range of factors as we look at the tariffs. The largest factor is the impact on the economy and a range of industries.
And the transparency question I have, in 2017 and 2018, the president routed $13 million of income through S corporations. There are some ethics experts who are calling on him to divulge the specific sources of income in those revenue streams. Richard Painter, who ran for the Senate as a Democrat, has been among those who are calling for this. Will President Biden be releasing the sources of income that were in that $13 million, particularly as there's attention being paid to his son and whether he earned any money from his businesses?
Well, again, the president doesn't have dealings with his family members about business, and he has released decades of tax returns, which is more than I can say for his predecessor. Go ahead.
Thanks, John. I wanted to ask about North Korea. So some South Korean officials are saying that North Korea is likely to conduct another nuclear test around the time that President Biden goes to South Korea. Is the president monitoring this, and is the White House going to roll out any preemptive sanctions in the next week or so?
Well, I will say we are certainly monitoring, and I would note that when the president goes to South Korea and Japan, North Korea, especially given their recent tasks, will be front and center in the agenda and discussing security in the region with them. I don't have anything to predict or preview in terms of any preemptive sanctions or actions.
Just ask, the new South Korean president is coming in tomorrow, and he's expected to take a much more hawkish stance on China and North Korea compared to his predecessor, who wanted to really work closely with North Korea. So does the White House welcome this kind of new hawkish stance against the two countries?
The president looks forward to having a conversation with him about security in the region and, of course, denuclearization of the peninsula. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Just a
Last
few
one. Go ahead.
follow-up
Yeah.
questions. About the Cambodian Prime Minister.
Sure.
He's been in power since 1985, which is the last time answering machines were a thing.
Yeah. More recently than that, I would say, but
He's been accused of corruption,
yes,
of violence, of repression. This is the first time he's come to the White House. How does the White House respond to criticism that by allowing him in here and meeting with him, you're legitimizing that?
I would say that the president has never held back in raising concerns about human rights when he has conversations with leaders where that's relevant. And this is an ASEAN meeting where all of the ASEAN member nations are included and invited. It's not isolating, it's not doing a state visit or anything along those lines. It's an opportunity to discuss with leaders in the region a range of topics that we work together on, whether it's COVID or economic growth or security in the region, and that's exactly what will be the focus, but he has never held back in raising concerns where he has them, including with countries where we have a range of work we do together. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.
Decided it's Thursday.
You're excited that it...
We decided it's Thursday.
Oh, is that right? Can we just decide it's Friday then? I mean, why not?
I vote, but I was voted down as being too aggressive.
All right, a couple of things at the top, and then we'll get right to you. So I just wanted to make you aware the Secretary had 2 phone calls with counterparts this morning. First, he spoke with the Greek Minister of National Defense regarding the situation in Ukraine. Of course, he thanked Greece for its security assistance and contributions to Ukraine. They also discussed the importance of continued allied and partner assistance and agreed to continue to closely collaborate on these issues, including finding a time to meet in Washington later this year. They also reviewed the deepening defense partnership between the United States and Greece resulting from the updated U.S.-Greece Mutual Defense Cooperation Agreement. The Secretary also continued his routine conversations with the Ukrainian Minister of Defense, Minister Reznikov. So they had yet another talk this morning. The Secretary highlighted for Minister Reznikov the President's announcement last Friday of an additional $150 million in presidential drawdown authority to continue to provide Ukraine's armed forces with artillery, counter-artillery radars, and electronic jamming equipment. And the minister was grateful for this additional support, also helped share his view of what was going on the battlefield with Secretary Austin. Secretary Austin emphasized our enduring commitment to bolster Ukraine's capacity to counter Russian aggression and updated the minister on our ongoing coordination with allies and partners on security assistance efforts. I think you guys have heard us talk many times that we're continuing to help coordinate the provision of security assistance materials from many other allies and partners. And of course, as always, they pledged to remain in close contact, and they of course will. On the exercise front, between May and September of this year, the U.S. Army Pacific will participate in over 15 major exercises with multiple, try that again. This one's a tough one, with multiple multinational and joint partners across the Indo-Pacific. During this period of time, Army Pacific will execute Operation Pathways across the Indo-Pacific and Asia, deploying thousands of troops and equipment sets to execute tactical actions that solve operational and strategic problems. The first of these events is an exercise that's called Marara. Did I say that right, Mike? Marara? Which began Saturday in French Polynesia. From now until the 21st, this 13-nation exercise held in the South Pacific, and there it goes, it died on me, right in mid-sentence. Luckily, I've got it back up here. I think we're just going to have to go back to the old notebook. Okay, from now till the 21st, this 13-nation exercise held in the South Pacific environment will improve interoperability, enhance the ability to conduct humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and share knowledge and expertise. Army Pacific soldiers and Marines, along with the USS Pearl Harbor, approximately 1,000 total, will primarily train with the French military to further strengthen relationships and help increase our presence in the region. So very exciting exercise, lots to get done over the next few months, and we'll keep you guys updated on that. We'll start with questions, and Lita, I think you're up.
Thanks, John. 2 things. With the pace of the weapons and other U.S. contributions to Ukraine going fairly quickly, how long before the Pentagon is going to need the additional drawdown authority in order to avoid some delays in sending some material to Ukraine? And then the second question is on training. At this point, as you look at the training that's being given to the Ukrainian troops, can you give us a sense of what the demand is for the training and whether or not the Florida National Guard is enough, or you're going to have to bolster that? Where do you see that going?
So on the second question, we don't right now see a need to boost the number of trainers. We believe that with the assets we already have, and of course the Florida National Guard are participating and helping in that, but they're not the only ones. You saw the Canadians are also providing some howitzer training. We believe right now we're okay. But we obviously want to be flexible, and if we need to change the numbers or add people to do training, we'll certainly be open to looking at that. And I completely blanked on your first question.
The drawdown authority, how long before that starts to run out? You've used all but I think about $100 million.
$100 million left in the current authorities. we believe that between what the president just announced Friday and the 100 million that we still have left, and we're going to be working that in real time with the Ukrainians, that will get us to about the third week of this month is what we're pretty much anticipating, which is why we continue to urge Congress to pass the president's supplemental request as soon as possible so that we can continue to provide aid to Ukraine uninterrupted. So we think with what we got left, that'll get us through most of this month in terms of future packages and future material, but that's why we're urging Congress to act quickly. Idris.
Over the weekend, some U.S. diplomats went back to the embassy in Kyiv. Are there any Marines yet at the embassy? And if not, have any of them gone to do sort of assessments in the case that there is a need for them there?
There was no Marine security attached to the diplomats. Everything was done through diplomatic security personnel. There was no need to have the Marines there. Remember, the mission of the Marine Security Detachment is to protect what is considered U.S. soil. That's why they're there. And right now, the embassy is not fully occupied, and so it's not considered. It's obviously still our embassy, but there's no need to have a permanent Marine Corps security detachment there. So we're in constant discussions with the State Department here, and we'll certainly follow their lead as they determine what sort of embassy presence they want and on what timeline. But there were no Marines, no U.S. military involved in this visit to Kyiv and to the embassy.
And second question, the reports from Ukraine and the Russians sort of suggest the territorial gains in the east are very limited on both sides. Is it too early to say we're at a stalemate now in the Donbass as far as the ground offensive is concerned?
Yeah, look, when you say the word stalemate, too many people look at that and they think, well, that means nobody's moving, right? That everything is kind of stuck. You think of World War I and trench warfare, and everybody's kind of, and it's very dynamic, Idris. I would not call it a stalemate. There are literally towns and villages that are changing hands, sometimes in the course of a day or so. And we assess that the Russians continue to make incremental progress, moving down from the north, pushing down into the Donbass area from the north of that area, particularly along a line of axis coming out of a town called Izium. But it's incremental. And it's still plodding, as I've said it. It's slow and it's uneven, and they continue to meet a very stiff Ukrainian resistance. So, no, we would not call it a stalemate in the classic sense that just everything is frozen. It's not frozen. There's a lot of artillery going back and forth. There's a lot of movement back and forth. It's just that when you take two steps back in the aggregate, you don't see the Russians really making a lot of progress over the course of time. We still believe that they are behind their own schedule and that what progress they're making is very limited in terms of just geographic reach. Jen?
John, I'd like to get your reaction to Putin's speech on Red Square today at Victory Day and the fact that they didn't have any flyovers. They usually have flyovers. What did you notice about this, and what's your reaction to the words he chose and what he said?
Look, I can't account for their parade planning and what assets they had or didn't have. I think the Ministry of Defense Mr. Putin can speak to their parade. What I would tell you is that we still heard some of the same bluster, some of the same falsehoods, some of the same, quite frankly, just untruths in terms of his rhetoric that we've heard from the beginning. He talked about this being a justified military operation. It's not. He still had diplomatic options on the table on February 24th and chose to ignore them. Ukraine posed no threat, not only no threat to Russia, but no threat to anybody else. So it wasn't justified. He said it was timely, that it needed to happen now. No, it didn't. Again, he had plenty of options available to him. And he said, and he talked about, ridding the region or of Ukraine of Nazis. You know who's in Ukraine? Ukrainians, not Nazis. It was just a ridiculous claim. So we heard pretty much the same out of Mr. Putin. What we didn't hear, not that we expected to, but what we should have heard was plans for how he's going to end the war. how he's going to move his forces out of Ukraine, and how he's going to finally respect Ukraine as a sovereign state and nation that borders his, a nation that posed absolutely zero threat. That's what we didn't hear, and I think that's what he should have said.
He said in his speech that Ukraine was on the verge of getting nuclear weapons and that was one of the reasons they went in.
Another falsehood. Just not true.
And the Ukrainian government says that 1.2 million Ukrainians have now been deported to Russia and are in these camps. Do you have evidence of that? Do you see these camps? Are these concentration camps?
I can't assert to the number, but we certainly have seen indications that Ukrainians are being moved from Ukraine into Russia. I can't speak to how many camps or what they look like. I mean, I don't know that we have that level of detail, but we do have indications that Ukrainians are being taken against their will into Russia. Again, unconscionable, not the behavior of responsible power. Certainly another indication that he simply won't accept and respect Ukrainian sovereignty and that they are citizens of another nation.
Isn't that ethnic cleansing, though, if you take 1.2 million people from a country and move them to camps?
I'm going to let, that's not a determination that is best coming from the U.S. Defense Department. We've long talked about the fact that we do believe Russian soldiers continue to conduct war crimes. But beyond that, I think it's better not for the Defense Department to make that kind of determination. There's a process for that, and it doesn't reside here in the Pentagon, and we want to respect that. But look, I mean, again, you don't have to look very far to see evidence of Russian brutality here continued. We're on day 75, which means 75 days of brutalizing the nation of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And every time you think they just can't fall to a new low, they prove you wrong. Yeah, Travis.
Thanks, John. With all the U.S. weapons and hardware flowing into Ukraine, is there any concern about the Ukrainians' ability to maintain that equipment? Do they have the capacity to do that? And has the department been having any discussions with the Ukrainians about potential solutions, like using private contractors to work on the equipment?
Yeah, look, I mean, one of the reasons why, I mean, we've talked about the kinds of systems we're giving them is we really are trying to provide them the kinds of things they know how to already use, and that's why we've been working with so many other nations who have inventories of old Soviet-era weapons and systems, because that's what the Ukrainians are comfortable with. It's what they're trained on. It's what they're used to using. Now, we have started to, as the war has gone on, and they have, continued to work themselves through some of those systems, we have been trying to provide them with some additional advanced systems that do come from our inventory. The howitzer is a great example of that. But that required some training. It still is. We've now trained more than 300 Ukrainian artillerymen on the howitzers, and there's another 50 plus that are going through that training right now. We've also just started today a 2-week maintainer course for the howitzer, because it is a system that not only do they not have experience using, but they don't have experience maintaining. And as you use these things, any artilleryman will tell you, they're going to break every now and then. There's going to be required maintenance. And so we've just now started a 2-week course, just actually started today, to take some artillerymen and put them through some maintenance training. And I suspect that too will be an ongoing requirement. And if that's needed for some of the other systems, we'll look at that. But I think, some of the other systems like the counter-artillery radar, the mobile air defense radar, Right now, we're focused on getting them the operational training on that, and if we feel like there's a need to do additional training on maintaining, we'll do that. I just don't have any plans to announce for that. So, well, but Travis, while we understand the need to do that, as you give them more capable systems, we also want to be mindful that we don't overload their system with too much of that, because they're still very much in an active fight. And manpower matters to them in that fight. So it's a balance. You want to make sure that they can use the material, that they can keep it up and maintain it, but you don't want to put such an onerous requirement on them that it distracts them too much from the fight at hand. So again, this is another reason why, you know, we're staying in touch with Minister Reznikov to have that kind of conversation, to make sure that we're striking the best balance in that regard.
I think that's the concern. There's so much moving in that they might not have the capacity. So is the sense that this new training program that for maintainers that you're putting together will fill that need, or do you anticipate that there's going to be additional need that they're going to have to figure out some way?
I think it's too soon to know. But what I can tell you is that we're going to stay open-minded here, and if there's a need for additional training, if there's a need for other systems that could use some maintenance support, to include the provision of spare parts, because we can't expect that the Ukrainians are going to necessarily have all the spare parts for these things, then, you know, we're going to do that. In fact, we have already, the howitzers are a great example. I mean, as part of the shipment of the actual pieces, the artillery tubes, we have already started to flow in spare parts, the kinds of parts that are the ones that, you know, that you need the most when you're using them in combat. So we're going to stay open-minded on that. Yeah. Yeah.
On $100 million left, is it just $100 million left out of the $3.8 billion of drawdown authorities, or can you just clarify what did you mean by $100 million left out
of the authorities that we had been granted by Congress? We have about $100 million left.
And then the rest of it have been used in procurement of arms and ammunition?
Well, we're talking about drawdown authority only, and so that's why the president asked, as part of this $33 billion supplemental that's on the Hill right now, $5 billion of it is just for additional presidential drawdown authority. $6 billion is to be used in the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. So that's where that $6 billion would be, where we would go out and buy the material specifically with the purpose specifically to send it into Ukraine. The drawdown authority allows us to go get it off our shelves. We already own it. It's already ours, and get it right to Ukraine. So we have about $100 million left in terms of what we haven't announced. We think, and again, this is an estimate, but third week of this month, by the third week of the month, we expect to utilize all of that. Which is why, again, we encourage Congress to act quickly on the supplemental that the president submitted, because that will be able to just keep the flow going uninterrupted. As you have seen, we have continued drawdown packages. It varies in frequency, but pretty frequently, sometimes more than one a week, depending on what we're giving to them. So obviously time is of the essence. We want to be able to, we'd like to be in a situation where there's no interruption to that ability to draw down out of our own stocks.
And also on Donbass, of course, it has been weeks. Russians have been building up their forces in Donbass, and then you have been saying that they are just moving extremely slowly. Can you, to what extent does the building think that Russians are going to fail in Donbass as well? Like if you give a...
We're not going to predict, the outcome here, Kasim. That's that I can't imagine in what world that would be a prudent thing for us to do. All we can do is tell you what we're seeing, and I've done that. And the other thing we can do is to continue to talk to the Ukrainians, as we did today, about their needs in the Donbass specifically, and making sure that we're doing our best to meet that. That $150 million package that we announced Friday, that does that. It's very much in line. And the next $100 million, if in fact it's $100 million, I don't know what the amount's going to be for the next package, but let's assume that that's it. We'll do exactly the same. working with the Ukrainians about what they need. So we're, I can't predict outcomes on the battlefield. We would never do that. What I can predict for you is that our commitment to helping Ukraine defend itself for the fight they're in, that will absolutely continue. Sylvie.
Yes, thank you. You said that the fighting is very dynamic. Do you see the artillery that U.S. has provided to the Ukrainians making a difference on the ground?
We know, again, our knowledge is limited. Once these things go into Ukraine, they belong to Ukraine, and how and when they use them is up to them. All I can do is tell you that that what we're hearing from the Ukrainians are two things. One, that they are being used. The howitzers specifically are being used in combat. Now, I don't know how many, and I don't know where, but they are being used, and that they are effective, and that there is, as we have long said there would be, there is a heavy reliance in this particular fight in the Donbass region specifically on artillery. Long-range fires is the way we talk about it here, but it's basically artillery fire. And both sides are firing artillery at the other's positions. So we know they're being useful, and we're hearing that directly from the Ukrainians. Oren?
I'm just curious, as you near the third week of this month and near the end of the drawdown authority, does the pace of equipment going into Ukraine continue at its previous pace, or is that slowed as you near the last bit here?
No, we're not slowing it down based on, I mean, we've gotten enough indications out of Congress, and there's bipartisan support for supporting Ukraine. Everything coming out of the Hill tells us that this supplemental will be acted on and approved. That doesn't mean we still don't want it to get acted on very, very quickly so that there is no interruption. But as for the pace, it's going to the same speed as it was before. I mean, there are still, multiple flights a day heading into the region, into transshipment sites outside of Ukraine, not just from the United States, but from other nations as well. And there's still a daily movement on the ground of that material inside Ukraine. Now, that's still happening at pace. Now, again, we're always adjusting. I can't say the same number of shipments get into Ukraine on any given day. You have to adjust it based on the security environment and the threat, and also the absorption rate of the Ukrainians and how much can they, how much they're in a fight. So you don't want to throw the kitchen sink at them every day when they haven't, figured out a place to put everything or where they're gonna move it to. So again, that's a constant balance that we're striking, and that's why we're in touch with the Ukrainians every day. But short answer to your question is, we're not allowing the fact that we're down to 100 million left, and we think that that'll get us through the third week of the month to slow down what we're already providing. And we want to have a little flexibility with what we've got left to make sure that it more discreetly, meets their needs. So we know there's not much left in this current set of authorities. So we want to use it smartly, and we want to make sure that as we work that next package, that it's again lockstep with what their requirements are. David,
do you have a plan for what you would do if the legislation isn't enacted by the third week?
Well, we still have some, as you heard from Mr. LaPlante, we still have some money in terms of USAI, the Security Assistance Initiative, to go purchase things to provide them. But we're working closely with Congress on this. And again, we've seen no indication that this is going to be an issue. I mean, every indication we're hearing, including from Speaker Pelosi just yesterday, is that Congress will act on this.
Does that Lend-Lease legislation make it possible to send stuff without any money from Congress?
I think I'll let the president speak for this, and I think there'll be more. He'll have more to say on this later today. I don't want to get ahead of the president. I would just say that any support that we get from Congress, and Congress has been very supportive, but any additional support we get from Congress in terms of security assistance to Ukraine is welcome, and we'll work inside that. Gordon?
Yeah, I just want to go back to this stalemate, not stalemate, a little bit. You know, a few weeks ago, 3-4 weeks ago, there was a lot of energy behind the idea that those weeks that we're now in, after the Russians retrenched and focused on the east, you know, was a do or die moment, and that it was critical to seeing how well they would do. There does not, you know, despite the incrementalism and the dynamic battlefield, there does not seem to be those kinds of objectives overtaken. Are you guys at all even surprised by the lack of that momentum now? You know, forgetting like whatever happens on the battlefield, but are you surprised with the lack of momentum that they've achieved thus far? And what do you think that means either way?
The lack of momentum by the Russians.
Correct.
I wouldn't say there's surprise. I mean, we're watching this unfold in real time, same as you, Gordon. In fact, some of what we thought was going to happen has happened. We knew that this would be an artillery fight, and it's turning out to be an artillery fight. We knew that the Russians would meet a stiff Ukrainian resistance because they have been there since before the war began. I mean, there's been fighting in the Donbass region, and that has proven true, that the Ukrainian resistance in the Donbass remains stiff. And that progress in the Donbass, because of the terrain, because of the weather, the mud, and because of the fact that it's flat, it's open, it's not as urban, that it would be that the Russians would have to, in order to achieve their progress, they would have to focus on small towns and villages. Unlike when early, remember, we were talking about encircling, right? They were trying to encircle Kyiv, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, all these larger towns. And so what we're seeing now is a focus on sort of smaller gains, smaller towns and villages. And again, this is terrain that the Ukrainians know extraordinarily well. So I don't know that there's like a lot of surprise here, but it's certainly clear, at least where we stand on day 75, and nobody knows what day 76 is going to look like, that the Russians have not overcome the challenges that they were trying to overcome in this new part of the conflict. They haven't. They've gotten a little bit better at logistics and sustainment, but not so much that they feel comfortable outrunning or even attempting to outrun their lines of supply. They haven't solved their command and control problems. They have submitted, now they've put in the fight more than 90 battalion tactical groups, but it's not clear exactly what the operational effectiveness is of all those, because so many of them have been depleted because of the previous fighting. And we don't believe that they have, while they have tried to get better, and you certainly see pockets where they are more integrated, air to ground and maneuver between units, it hasn't gelled yet. So they are certainly trying to get better, but there's not an indication here that they've solved all their problems. And as you might recall, a week or so ago, we were talking about that it remained to be seen whether they were going to be able to fix the kind of problems that they had in the north. And thus far, day 75, it doesn't appear like they have. Rio.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask you about South Korea. The new administration will come into office tomorrow. That they are strongly interested in reinforcing deterrence against North Korea. Is the U.S. willing to discuss bigger military exercises, more U.S. assets on the Korean Peninsula with the new administration?
I won't get ahead of discussions that haven't happened. We look forward to working with the new government in South Korea, as we do with every new administration there. South Korea remains a key ally. We're always going to look for ways to make the alliance better and more capable, and I'll leave it there. We'll see where the discussions go.
Separate question on North Korea. the U.S. publicly said that North Korea could be ready to conduct a nuclear test as early as this month. So generally speaking, you are reluctant to talk about intelligence matters in public. So what effect do you expect by disclosing the intelligence on nuclear test? Do you expect it works as a deterrence against North Korea?
We're doing that because we are a responsible nation that prioritizes the reduction of strategic risks. And we believe firmly that the international community must speak with a unified voice to oppose further development of such weapons by the North. So we're doing it because it's the responsible thing to do. Mike.
John, speaking of artillery.
Oh, man. Why don't you just come up and give this part of the briefing?
Okay, I will.
Go ahead.
Ukraine has specifically asked for SP howitzers like the 109 because it'll provide them with more mobility on the battlefield and a level of ballistic protection that you won't get on an M777. France is sending over a dozen of their wheeled howitzers, the Caesar. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Italy have all agreed to either send over the M109s themselves or the German PZH 2000 SP howitzer. My question is, the U.S. has more M109s than any country in the world. Why is the administration dragging its feet on sending these weapon systems to Ukraine? And they need them now.
Well,
they want them now.
I would take issue that we're dragging our feet on anything, Mike. I mean, no nation has done more to support Ukraine's security needs in the United States. No nation. I mean, in just the drawdown authorities we've used already, we've provided to Ukraine almost the equivalent of their entire defense budget for 2021. So I take issue with the idea that we're dragging our feet. What we are doing, including today in the call with Minister Reznikov, is talking to the Ukrainians at the senior levels all the way down to the staff level about what they need and what we can provide them. And it's not just the United States, as you well noted. Other nations are providing systems as well. So I'm not going to get inside the conversations we're having with the Ukrainians on privately about their needs, but I think the proof is in what we're announcing every day about how seriously we're taking their requirements. Louis.
There's been talk about how the incremental progress in the East has been due to the stiff Ukrainian resistance. There's also...
And some of the problems they've had with their own logistics and sustainment, command and control, integration. I mean, it's a combination.
It's a combination, right? But there's also a big rush to try to get those howitzers in very, very quickly. And
Almost all of them are in.
Yep. Can you comment on what effect the howitzers have had as part of that combined effort?
Again, all I can do is tell you what we're hearing from the Ukrainians. Again, we don't track each tube and where it's at and how many rounds it's firing on any given day. It belongs to Ukraine when it goes in there, and they use it as they see fit. We know, as my answer to Sylvie, we know that they're getting in and they're actually being used in combat. We know that. You heard the Secretary testify to that last week. And what we're hearing from the Ukrainians are they're very useful and they're grateful for them, and that they are having an impact because they're additive to their own artillery pieces. I mean, all told, the 90 that we're providing us, provides them 5 to 7 battalions worth of howitzers. That's not insignificant. But I don't have, I couldn't give you a GPS coordinate for each one and exactly how many rounds it's firing and what it's hitting. But the indications we're getting from the Ukrainians are they're in combat and they're being effective. And more broadly, Louis, if you just take a step back and, back to Idris's question about stalemate and what's going on. I mean, if you just take a look at what's going on, the fighting over these small towns and villages, some of them trading hands over the course of just a couple of days, you can see. I mean, I've seen some of the overhead imagery. You can see how active an artillery fight this really is. I mean, it is, back to Gordon's question, I mean, it is exactly like we thought it was going to be, like the Ukrainians thought it was going to be, very dependent on long-range fires. And both sides are applying artillery in this fight.
Do you think that this moment that Gordon described, the pivotal 2 weeks and the rush to get him in there in time, that it has borne fruition on
I certainly wouldn't speak for the Ukrainians. I think it's better for them to speak to their assessment of how they're doing and how much, more specifically, how much the Western aid has helped. But again, our indications from talking to them is that it has been incredibly critical to their ability to continue to defend themselves in the Donbass, particularly the howitzers and the rounds that go with them, because it is so reliant on long-range fires. But it's not just that. I mean, the counter-artillery radars that they're going to be able to use will help them defend against Russian artillery. UASs will help give them eyes and longer-range strike capability. I mean, it's not just, we're talking a lot about howitzers today, which I never thought I'd be able to do with any semblance of knowledge. Thank you, Mike. But it's not just that. And again, what the feedback we're getting is that these things, all these things, but particularly the artillery support, is making a difference. Yeah, Christina.
Given the deterioration, sort of again in Hong Kong, the democratic systems there that are just kind of slowly being taken away, do you see any sort of, or would you like to address some of the changes that might engender in the security situation in the region?
Well, I missed.
Well, in Hong Kong, we've had a recent change in the way the governorship is going to be handled.
I think that's a better question put to Ned Price over at the State Department. I think I'll refrain from that.
Have you seen any change in the security situation, or do you anticipate that in the region?
I am not aware of any security situation that's different. Joe Gould.
Hey, John, thanks for taking my question. I want to ask you on the Phoenix Ghost, now that this cohort of Ukrainian troops has wrapped up training, can you tell us where that training took place? And now that we know Phoenix Ghost stemmed from an Air Force program, can you tell us if the trainers were with the U.S. Air Force?
Yeah, the trainers were Air Force. I think I talked about that last week. The training, the week-long training for Phoenix Ghost took place at Ramstein. And it wrapped up, it just wrapped up, I think, a I think yesterday. Okay, I'm going to have to call it there. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday. One thing at the top, and then I will take your questions. On May 8th and May 9th, 1945, celebrations erupted around the world to mark the end of World War II in Europe after Nazi Germany surrendered its military forces to the Allies. It represented the defeat of the forces of authoritarianism, of oppression, and of aggression. We honor the sacrifice of all those who made that victory in 1945 possible. We also join our friends in the European Union celebrating Europe Day today, working to realize the dream of a Europe whole, free, and at peace, which is more urgent today than in any time in recent memory. Today, President Putin's unprovoked war against Ukraine, its peaceful neighbor, again threatens the stability of Europe, violating the principles that undergird the rules-based international order. His cold-blooded aggression has ended too many lives, forced millions of Ukrainian citizens from their homes, and brought suffering to millions more. Just this past weekend, President Putin's forces executed an airstrike on a school serving as a bomb shelter, and reports indicate that around 60 civilians are under the rubble. On this solemn occasion, we reiterate that the United States stands with Ukraine. We thank our allies, we thank our partners who are providing safe haven to refugees from Ukraine. We applaud the countries that have stood up to the Kremlin's bullying and threats. The United States remembers that victory over tyranny is hard fought and hard won, and we will continue to support Ukraine as it fights for the freedom of its country and its people and the values we together share. Yesterday, the United States took sweeping actions to hold perpetrators and facilitators of human rights abuses accountable, to impose severe costs on the government of the Russian Federation, and to degrade the Kremlin's ability to support President Putin's unprovoked and unjustified war against Ukraine. Specifically, we imposed visa restrictions on over 2,600 Russian and Belarusian military officials who are believed to have been involved in actions that threaten or violate the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of Ukraine. Including among this group are personnel who reportedly took part in Russian military activities in Bucha, the horrors of which have shocked the world. We designated the executives and board members of 2 of Russia's most important banks, a Russian state-owned bank and 10 of its subsidiaries, and a state-supported weapons manufacturer. Further, we designated the Ministry of Defense's shipping company and 6 other maritime shipping companies that transport weapons and other military equipment for the government of Russia, while identifying 69 of their vessels as blocked property. Additionally, we designated a specialized marine engineering company that produces remotely operated subsea equipment, among other activities. We also designated 3 state-owned and controlled media outlets that are within Russia and have been among the largest recipients of foreign revenue, which feeds back to the Russian state. These television stations are key sources of disinformation used to bolster President Putin's war. Finally, the United States is cutting off Russia's access to certain key services from U.S. companies that the Russian Federation and Russian elites exploit to hide their wealth and evade these very sanctions. We are prohibiting U.S. persons, wherever located, from providing accounting, trust, and corporate formation and management consulting services to any person located in Russia. We are also identifying the accounting, trust, and corporate formation services and management consulting sectors of the Russian economy, which will allow the United States to target any person who operates or has operated in these sectors of the Russian economy. Our actions yesterday complement previous steps we have taken with our allies and partners since the beginning of Russia's unconscionable war. The United States will continue to execute new economic measures against Russia as long as the Russian Federation continues its aggression against Ukraine. With that, happy to turn to your questions.
Thanks, Ed. Happy Monday. A couple things on Ukraine, on the sanctions, and then after that, I wanted to ask you just if you have any thoughts about President Putin's Victory Day speech today and what you thought about it. But on the sanctions first, and I suspect that your answers will be brief. One, can you be at all more specific about the visa restrictions, about who these 2,600 people are, how many of them are actually accused of or suspected of or have been identified as being suspects in committing war crimes, and how many others are just what you would say, I suppose, just complicit in the whole operation. And then also on the sanctions, secondly, are you concerned at all that the sanctions that you've imposed on these Russian-owned state-owned TV stations will open up, in particular, U.S.-funded, more restrictions, more Russian restrictions on U.S.-funded media outlets?
Sure. So on your first question, Matt, as you know, we announced a slew of measures yesterday. The visa restrictions on Belarusian and Russian military officials was one element of that, as you alluded to, and as I alluded to at the top. We imposed sanctions on 3 of the most highly viewed state-controlled TV stations. We put measures in place to prevent U.S. persons from providing key services to individuals in the Russian Federation. We announced additional export controls, new controls to further limit Russia's access to items and revenue that could potentially support its military activity. And we sanctioned a large number of individuals, including the actually more than 2,600 individuals you mentioned. Specifically, we took action to impose visa restrictions on 2,596 Russian nationals who are members of Russia's armed forces and are believed to have been involved in actions that threatened or violated Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence. A majority of these nationals were reportedly in Bucha during the atrocities that occurred in March of this year. We further targeted 13 Belarusian military officials believed to have supported or been actively complicit in President Putin's war against Ukraine. When it comes to the sanctioning of these television stations, I think a couple points are in order. First, these are some of the most prolific purveyors of the misinformation and rather the disinformation that President Putin and his government have consistently fed to Russians. These are some of the very outlets that claimed that the atrocities, potential war crimes that we have all seen in Bucha and other places were staged, that they took place after Russian forces left, that they are the work of Ukraine, of the West. There is no doubt that these are key elements in President Putin's efforts to keep his people in the dark and to actually place a veil of disinformation around their heads. Importantly, what we did was deprive the ability of U.S. advertisers, any U.S. advertiser that would see fit to advertise with these stations, to do so. And not only are these key sources of misinformation and disinformation for President Putin and the Kremlin, but they are key sources of foreign revenue, about $300 million a year. That is not a paltry sum, especially when you take into account the fact that we have systematically choked off many of the sources of foreign revenue that President Putin and the broader Kremlin have been able to enjoy. So we know the Kremlin often takes part in moral equivalence. I am somewhat certain they might seek to do so here, but there is no equivalence between what these stations do and what US-funded outlets do around the world. And then on your question in terms of President Putin's speech today, look, rather than respond directly to something that is so ahistorical, something that is so divorced from reality, it's an opportunity for us to be clear about the facts and the reality. Contrary to what we heard today in Moscow, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a brutal war of choice. It was unprovoked, it was unjustified, it was premeditated, and it has brought catastrophic loss of life across Ukraine. Ukrainians, and yes, Russian service members, who, many of whom were sent to Ukraine without prior knowledge to fight and die for a war that many of them may have wanted no part in. We know that in the conduct of this war, Russia's forces have committed war crimes and carried out atrocities. Just this weekend, we saw a school in eastern Ukraine leveled by a Russian bomb. I mentioned at the top, there were reports that dozens of individuals may still be under the rubble. To call this a defensive action is patently absurd. To call this anything other than a premeditated war of choice against the state of Ukraine, the government of Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, is an affront to the historical record. One other point on this, and many of you are deeply familiar with this because many of you were with us during these efforts, but Secretary Blinken, others in the administration, spared no diplomatic effort to prevent, to forestall this war. These efforts started last year, late last year, when we first went public with our concerns about what was then Russia's military buildup along the borders with Ukraine, inside Belarus. We tried to do so bilaterally, engaging directly with Foreign Minister Lavrov, engaging directly with his deputies in the context of the Strategic Stability Dialogue that Deputy Secretary Sherman led. We tried to do so multilaterally at the NATO-Russia Council, together with our NATO allies. We tried to do so multilaterally through the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, with a broader set of allies and partners. Of course, none of those efforts worked. It was not for lack of trying. It was not for lack of good faith effort. It was because this was a premeditated and wholly unjustified war. There's no other term for it, no other euphemism for it, even if you're not allowed to say it in Russia. That was premeditated and predetermined from the start. So to hear senior Russian officials claim otherwise, again, it is a disservice to history. It is an insult to those who have lost their lives and those who have fallen victim to this senseless aggression.
Okay, so on the visa bans, where do these names come from? And how do you know that the majority of the 2596 Russian troops were reportedly in Bucha? Are these coming from the Ukraine? Are the names coming from the Ukrainians, or do you have your own list of Russian soldiers who've been deployed to Ukraine?
So there's not too much I can say here. What I can say is that we pull from all sources of information that are available to us. In some cases, this will be public information, as you might imagine. In many cases, especially in instances like this, this information won't be public. It will be from our own sources of information. We do coordinate closely with our Ukrainian partners, but I will tell you that we do an immense amount of vetting on any information we receive to ensure that when we apply a statutory authority against any individual, against any entity or target, that individual entity or target does in fact meet the statutory requirements of the law.
You have no idea if any of these people actually have even Russian passports for which they could get or might be able to get a visa.
Well, there are some 2,500 Russians and 13 Belarusians.
Well, but do you know how many of them actually had visas or even had passports?
You probably won't be surprised to hear me say that visa records are confidential, so I just...
Well, I'm not surprised to hear you say that. Then on the TV thing,
Yes.
were you aware of any U.S. advertisers that were actually buying time on these channels? And by that, I'm trying to get at if you say you're denying them this opportunity, this revenue opportunity, what's the hit here? How much are they going to lose in U.S. advertising?
I couldn't tell you if any U.S. advertisers had been purchasing time recently, but what I can tell you is that there were hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue that these stations were pulling in. It's not only U.S. advertisers who are now not able to do this, but it sends an important signal to foreign companies around the world that might otherwise consider advertising in what not all that long ago was a lucrative marketplace, could have been a lucrative marketplace.
You don't have any idea what the hit that they're going to take is?
I don't have an assessment to offer for you right here. Himara.
Staying on Ukraine, I think it was last week, U.S. Ambassador to OSCE said U.S. was assessing that Russia was planning to annex Donetsk, Luhansk, hold a sham referendum there. There has been a lot of speculation on what Putin may or may not say today. Some of that hasn't materialized. Given that, is the U.S. still worried about this potential annexation? You guys, I think, had still the expectation from U.S. that that's going to happen around that.
Our concern remains, and our concern is based on a couple different elements. First, it is based on the Russian playbook. It is a Russian playbook that we have seen turn to time and again in Crimea, in eastern Ukraine. This is what Russian authorities and proto-authorities have done in the past. They have sought to annex. They have sought to conduct sham elections to give their occupation this patina of legitimacy. And our concern remains that they will attempt to do so once again in territory in eastern Ukraine. Timeline-wise, nothing has changed. We're continuing to watch very closely. What we wanted to do, and part of the reason why we wanted to have Ambassador Carpenter here last week to speak to all of you, was to put our concerns on the record. And this is similar to what we did across the board starting late last year and well into early this year, to put our concerns on the record so that if, and we think when, we see these sham elections in places like Kherson, that the world is keyed in, including spin to what is happening, that fewer people are fooled by what Russia and its authorities are attempting to do, and that so we can approach this eyes wide open. Go ahead.
Right. Just on the U.S. diplomats going back to Kyiv. So I mean, this is temporary. Can you sort of say, like, what's the latest U.S. assessment on the security situation there? And based on that, there was a previous projection that, again, like, the embassy's operations might be resumed there for good around mid-May, if I'm not mistaken. Is that still the projection based on the security situation?
Well, we haven't ever put a precise time frame on it. What we've said is that we will do it as soon as possible. And when Secretary Blinken was in Kyiv late last month with President Zelensky, he pledged to President Zelensky that our diplomats would be back in Kyiv as soon as possible, that our embassy would reopen as soon as possible. And so, of course, yesterday on Victory in Europe Day, Ambassador Kevin and a small contingent traveled back into Kyiv. This was something that we had been planning for some time under the direction of Secretary Blinken in close consultation with the White House, with the Department of Defense, and others. You were right that this is a temporary visit. It does not signal the reopening of our embassy at this time, but we have, and what the Secretary told President Zelensky when he saw him in Kyiv, was that we have accelerated planning to reopen our embassy. Of course, a foremost concern for us is the safety and security of our diplomats, of our personnel on the ground. We were confident that the chargé and a small team of hers would be in a position to make the trip yesterday. The chargé is still in Kyiv. She remains there. This visit, yes, was heavy on symbolism coming on Victory in Europe Day, but it is also heavy on substance. And I say that because the chargé and her team will be able to meet and have been able to meet with Ukrainian counterparts, with members of civil society, with other representatives of the international community, and conduct a whole host of activities that until yesterday they have not been able to conduct in Kyiv since prior to the invasion. So we are still assessing the security situation. As soon as we are confident in our ability to fully resume operations at our embassy, we'll do that.
Just for the record, it was actually end of May. I guess you guys are still targeting for that.
We said in weeks' time. We never offered a. Yes, Francesco.
Up on today's speech in Moscow, I heard what you said about the patent absurdity, but what do you make of all the speculations of the fact that he would declare war and mobilize more formally the Russians, and that didn't happen? What's your comment about that?
I can't speculate as to the speculation and why such speculation may or may not have come to fruition. I think what I offered here the other day is that a declaration of war, a mass mobilization, may well have been tantamount to admitting what the world knows, and that is that the Ukrainians have achieved great strides and that they have been able to stand up to an aggressing force, to hold out, and we are now more than 10 weeks into this conflict, a conflict that Russian officials, Russian leaders thought would culminate in a matter of hours or a matter of days with Russia de facto in charge of Ukraine. Of course, that has not happened, and it hasn't happened because of the tenacity, the grit, the determination, the bravery, the courage of our Ukrainian partners and the enabling assets that the United States and our partners around the world, dozens of partners across 4 continents, have provided to our Ukrainian partners. $3.8 billion since the start of the invasion alone from the United States alone. Other partners have provided other sums of security assistance. But 2 other points on what we heard today in Moscow. Much of it was quite ironic. First irony is that this was a day to commemorate the victory against the forces of authoritarianism, of oppression, of aggression. That's what happened 77 years ago when the international community, including, might I add, Russia, came together to stop the Nazi advance. And today, the Russians have attempted to co-opt that cause, to celebrate some of these very features that the world sought to vanquish nearly 8 decades ago. I suppose the other great irony is that Moscow is celebrating Victory Day. They're celebrating a victory, and it is in the midst of a victory, but it is in the midst of a Ukrainian victory. And this gets back to what I was saying before, what the Ukrainians have been able to achieve, principally with their own determination and tenacity, but also enabled by what the United States and our partners around the world have provided, is nothing short of remarkable. I think there are few people who might have thought that we would see today, more than 10 weeks after the start of this invasion, a capital city that is coming back to life, whose cafes are filled, whose boulevards are once again filled with people, with the same happening in other parts of the country. Now, that, of course, doesn't elide the fact that parts of Ukraine, eastern and southern Ukraine specifically, have been mercilessly targeted and continue to be targeted by Russian bombs, Russian missiles. And so that's why our effort to support our Ukrainian partners is far from finished. We have put forward a supplemental budget request of $33 billion, much of that for security assistance for the next 5 months to enable our Ukrainian partners to continue to achieve this kind of success on the battlefield, but ultimately to have a stronger hand at the negotiating table. What we are doing, principally, is putting our Ukrainian partners in a position for them to carry out their aims, ultimately their political objectives. We're strengthening their hand on the battlefield with our security assistance. At the same time, we are imposing increasing pressure on the Russian Federation, combining these two things so that our Ukrainian partners can be in the most advantageous position possible as they engage to try to end this war. Said.
Yeah, a couple of points that you mentioned. First of all, you have any comment on what apparently Pope Francis said, that NATO and the West were actually barking at Russia this whole time, in essence saying that maybe the Russians had a reason to do what they did. If you had any comment on that, if you saw his comment.
I did, and I've seen subsequent comments from the Vatican on this same matter. I've also seen Pope Francis's very clear condemnation of the aggression that is taking place in Ukraine, of the loss of life, the bloodshed, the brutality that is taking place.
Okay. Now, the other thing is also the President of France, French President Macron, said that you cannot, expect that the Russians will negotiate or achieve peace by continuing to humiliate Russia. So you talked about negotiations. You want to strengthen the Ukrainian hand and the negotiations, but it seems that there, or at least none of the rhetoric that is coming out from you guys, from your Western allies or NATO, that shows any flexibility. For instance, you talked about diplomatic efforts prior to the invasion that went on for a long time, yet you totally dismissed Russia's security demands or whatever that they expressed Russia's concerns.
Saeed, I don't think we totally dismissed anything. And in fact, we, as I said at the top, engaged in good faith. We believe that there was a path before us that if the Russians were acting in good faith, could have addressed some of their stated security concerns, but also could have addressed our concerns. And we put forward a pathway that was paved with certain measures, transparency measures, confidence building measures, non-proliferation measures that would have done just that. To say that we didn't account for Russia's security concerns, I'm sorry, but I think that is taking the bait that Moscow has put forward.
Now, one last thing on the diplomatic thing. Ambassador Antonov, I believe, said that he has not met with any American officials for the past 2 or 3 months and so on? And conversely, can you also share with us what is Ambassador Sullivan doing in Moscow and so on?
Ambassador Sullivan and his team at the embassy in Moscow are continuing to engage with their MFA counterparts. Of course, those engagements are largely limited to the bilateral relationship. There is a lot that Ambassador Sullivan and his team have on their plate, attempting to keep afloat a mission that has been severely constrained in terms of personnel, in terms of our ability to sustain an embassy community there, given some of the restrictions that the Russian Federation has placed on us. So they are continuing to engage with their MFA counterparts.
The Russian ambassador here.
You would need to speak to him about his engagements. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. The North Korea fire.
Sorry, on Russia.
Sure. We'll say maybe 1 or 2 questions on Russia. Go ahead, Jenny.
Has there been any update on the Americans detained there?
I don't have any update I can offer you right now. As you know, last week we made a variety of announcements. We made clear that we consider Brittany Griner to be wrongfully detained. We are working very closely on her case. We're working very closely on the case of Paul Whelan. Our message across the board for Americans who are detained in Russia is that we expect, consistent with the Vienna Convention, to have regular and consistent access to Americans who are detained, including those Americans who are in pretrial detention. So that is a message that, to Saeed's question about what we're doing with our Russian counterparts, that is certainly one message that we are pressing regularly with them, that we expect and insist upon this regular access.
How many are in pretrial detention right now?
Everywhere around the world, that's a number that fluctuates, and especially in a place where there is a somewhat sizable, although smaller, American citizen community, the number fluctuates. So I'm just not in a position to offer a static one. Cindy?
President Macron is in Berlin this evening for dinner with the German Chancellor. And of course, one item is going to be Macron's push for European integration, perhaps more independence from the U.S. also on defense matters. How does the U.S. view this in light of the united front supporting Ukraine?
We see a strong Europe as absolutely a good thing. We see a strong Europe as essential to transatlantic security and to the transatlantic partnership. Our point has always been that the capabilities that we have should be complementary to what Europe has and what Europe develops. So a strong Europe that is complementary to the United States, that works in close partnership with the United States, that is a realization of the framework of the idea that was put forward some 72 years ago, I suppose it was, by one of the architects of the European Union. Yes? Anything else on Russia, Ukraine before we move on? Russia, Ukraine? Okay. No, okay. We'll take 2 more on Russia. Yeah.
Sanctions. You mentioned some 2,600 soldiers. What about their family members? We have some instances such as, a young wife greenlighting her soldier husband's actions in Ukraine. Are you planning to extend, to family members as well? And also, any plan to extend the ban on professional services to legal services, which, I've heard from the Congress for many years that you should go after lawyers who have been enabling Russian kleptocrats, engaging in money laundering in the U.S.
We have not yet opted to go after legal services. We believe that those offering due process here, that those are not yet on the table in terms of our sanctions. But again, we're not going to rule anything in or out in terms of subsequent sanctions tranches. When it comes to the family members of service members, it is true that we have pursued with our various sanctions authorities close family members, close associates of senior Kremlin leadership, knowing that in many cases these are individuals who share an ill-begotten wealth, who in some way way enable the crimes, the injustices that their relatives or associates have put forward. I'm not aware that we've done that in the case of rank and file service members. I think the point is, in many cases, individuals have been sent to the front lines not initially knowing where they were going, why they were fighting, or what the intended objective was. So with our sanctions, we want to ensure that those we pursue have some sort of strategic value, some sort of strategic import.
On this information, it looks like Russians have been expanding their lies about biolabs to other countries such as Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, something that Azeris felt over the weekend that they had to respond to. I don't want to dignify what they're talking about in this room, but I want to give you a chance to respond to the fact that they are expanding geography when they talk about so-called biolabs. Thank you.
Again, I don't want to dignify those lies either. We know they are lies. We've been very clear about where we stand in terms of the Chemical Weapons Convention, where countries like, and the Biological Weapons Convention, where Ukraine stands in terms of the CWC and the BWC, where other countries stand, and that is in contrast to where Russia stands. Yes?
On those Victory Day celebrations, we did see thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Russians march in support of Vladimir Putin's military campaign. Now, do you see this as a sign that the war is gaining widespread support in Russia? And if yes, how do you combat that?
We see it as a sign that the Russian population is being fed a steady diet of disinformation and lies. This is one of the reasons why we went after the television stations we did with our sanctions today. President Putin and the mouthpieces of the Kremlin have been providing their people with lies, with disinformation, with misinformation, in order to sell them a war that I think if many of them knew the truth, they would reject out of hand. It is difficult to measure, to accurately measure popular opinion within Russia. Of course, what we can point to is the fact that at the very outset of this unjustified war, thousands upon thousands of Russians took to the street to protest it. Those protests were obviously met with a crackdown, in some cases a violent crackdown, in many cases, in up to 15,000 cases, if I recall, the imprisonment, the detention of individuals who were doing nothing more than exercising what should be the universal right to freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and doing so peacefully. So the phenomenon you point to may also be a reflection of the fact that President Putin has attempted to intimidate, has attempted to stifle any and all dissent. But we know that dissent exists. Many of your networks have personnel on the ground in Russia. They know that when they attempt to ask Russians their true thoughts of President Putin, the Kremlin, many of them walk away, oftentimes in fright. I think that says a lot. Okay, we'll move on.
Yeah, thank you. I talking about the North Korea fired the missiles. North Korea fired the SLBM on the 7th. The South Korean government reported that the North Korea launch was a SLBM, submarine launch ballistic missiles. Does the United States agree with this, or is there any other analyst in the United States?
Is there any other
analysis?
Our analysis is that this was the launch of a ballistic missile. Our analysis is that, like previous launches, including the 3 previous tests of the ICBM systems, that this was a clear violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. That's why we're discussing this, as we are previous provocations, previous launches with our allies in the Republic of Korea, in Japan, and also in New York.
Last time you said that North Korea's ICBM launch was an affront to the United Nations Security Council resolutions. But the UN Security Council resolution has not properly adopted the resolutions. Do you think the United Nations Security Council is fulfilling its role, or you need another alternative roles?
The UN Security Council has an important role to play. It has an important role to play that it's exercised in the past, and this gets back to the point I mentioned just a moment ago. The most recent ballistic missile launch, the 3 previous ICBM launches, the other ballistic missile launches in recent months, these have been in violation of multiple Security Council resolutions. The fact that these resolutions are on the books points to the utility that the Security Council, that the UN system can have in confronting North Korea's ballistic missile and nuclear weapons program. It's incumbent upon all countries, certainly including the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council, to see to it that UN Security Council resolutions are fully implemented, fully applied, because countries around the world, including the 5 members of the permanent Security Council members, those members that voted in support of these and other resolutions, have recognized the fact that the DPRK's ballistic missile and nuclear weapons programs are a threat to international peace and security. And of course, the Security Council is the world's preeminent forum. It was set up to be that, to address all threats to peace and security. This is one of them, and we'll continue to work on this issue with our allies and partners in New York. Yes?
Thank you, Mr. Price. As you know, Taliban didn't keep their commitment, and recently they ordered all women in Afghanistan to wear burqa, hijab, not regular hijab, burqa like that. Yesterday, Afghan women celebrated Mother's Day with the crying. Everybody contact with me, cry, I cried. All women in Afghanistan. Do you think it's not very backwards? That's crazy.
We've expressed our deep dismay. We've expressed our deep concern with what we have seen from the Taliban, with what we have heard from the Taliban in recent days and in recent weeks. Over the weekend, most recently, our special representative for Afghanistan, Tom West, our special envoy for Afghan women, girls, and human rights, Rina Amiri, Ian McCrary, our chargé, our Embassy Kabul chargé, who's now based in Doha, issued statements to this effect. And we have noted that the Taliban continue to adopt policies oppressing women and girls in many ways as a substitute for addressing the acute economic crisis and the need for inclusive government. And we've called for an end to these restrictive measures. Importantly, Afghans across the country have voiced their opposition to an edict that proposes severe restrictions and limitations on half the country's ability to participate in society. This follows, of course, on the heels of the decision with girls' secondary education. No country can succeed that holds back half of its population, its women, its girls, that doesn't allow them to go to secondary school, that dictates what they must wear in a restrictive way. Combined with the ban on secondary education, restrictions on freedom of movement, and these edicts related to clothing, the Taliban's policies towards women, we think, are an affront to human rights and will continue to impair their relations with the international community.
So what happened to the assessment that, or at least the hope, that the Taliban wouldn't do anything that, or would, understood that if it wanted to be internationally recognized, that if it wanted all the benefits that come with such recognition, that they wouldn't impose the kind of draconian rules and regulations that they did the first time they were in power. I mean, I remember conversations with you in this very room pre-withdrawal about why did you think that they had changed it all? Why did you think that they didn't care what the world thought the first time around they were in charge? Why would you possibly think that they would care the second?
Matt, our point has always been, well, let me start by saying our point was never that the Taliban is fundamentally different from the Taliban that existed in years prior. Our contention was always that the United States, especially when we're acting with partners around the world, we have sources of leverage to wield with the Taliban in response to the decision on secondary school, in response to this most recent decree, in response to some of the other human rights abuses and atrocities that we've seen in Afghanistan, we are working with our allies and partners to use that leverage.
What have you done? I mean, the secondary school decision is old now. I mean, it's not new, but there's been nothing done in response to it. What are you going to do now?
We've consulted closely with our allies and partners. There are steps that we will continue to take to increase pressure on the Taliban to reverse some of these decisions, to make good on the promises that they have made, first and foremost to their own people, not to mention to the international community.
What are those steps? I mean, other than if you coming out and saying we deeply deplore this and we don't think it's I mean, they don't care if you insult them or if you criticize them. It doesn't matter to them. So
leaving aside whether or not they care, there are sources of leverage, including incentives and disincentives.